Hello, let's talk about variables. What is a variable? So a variable can include a multitude of definitions. A variable includes a symbol that represents a number or value, a placeholder, a data type. Some examples of simple formulas that include variables is, for example, y equals x, which includes the variable y, includes the variable x, y equals 2x, y equals x squared. There's lots of other examples of variables. Variables could also include any symbol, like a star, emojis. You could have smiley face equals, whatever dollar amount or any number you want. You can assign any value to any variable, right? Why do we use variables? And so the main idea is to simplify complex relationships, complex formulas, complex mathematical models. For example, we might have an equation that has some large complex ideas, and those large complex ideas might, if we wrote them out in a paragraph, it'd be really weird to have paragraph 1 plus paragraph 2. So we can simplify some of these ideas, and we can simplify them down to a variable. And when we create a mathematical equation that contains those variables, it's going to be much easier for us to manipulate algebraically, especially when we're trying to isolate, for example, an unknown variable. And so I want to do that for just a small practice using this idea of isolating the unknown variable. So here's an example. I like this equation. This is usually what I use in my first day or two to make sure everyone's up on the same level with variables, and they hopefully can infer this from what they've learned in Algebra 1. So here's the equation. I like to use A, B is equal to CD. All right, first 4 letters of the alphabet, not too threatening. And what I usually will have people do is I have them isolate each of these variables. Let me give you an example. Say I do know A, but I don't know B. I do know C, and I do know D. So I know all of these except for B. I have no idea what B is. But like I said, I'm good. I know A, I know C, and I know D. Okay? And so what do I need to do? Ask yourself, what do you need to do in order to isolate B? In this case, I'm going to divide both sides by A. If I divide both sides by A, what happens on this side? A's cancel, cancel, cancel. And now I have B is equal to C times D over A. The fun thing about algebra, if we do something to both sides, we're good. In this case, we divided both sides by A, which is perfectly allowed. Right? Let's go back to this expression, and I want you to practice for a moment. I want you to not only isolate B, but I want you to imagine for a minute we need to isolate A, or we need to isolate C, or we need to isolate D. So I want you to pause this video and practice on a piece of paper. Make sure you can isolate each of those. Now let's do a slight variation. Let's make one of these sides a quotient. So instead of being AB equals CD, I want you to practice with AB equals C over D. And isolate each of those variables. Make sure you can solve for each of those. Okay, I'm going to assume you've done that, and I'm going to move on. A real-world example of variables is potentially pay. Maybe on the weekends I meant, or maybe over the summer, you had a job that included a variable pay. And an example of variable pay would be receiving tips. But typically they don't just pay you tips. Typically they pay you minimum wage plus tips, hopefully. Okay, and so if that was the case, you might get, for example, $10 plus tips. Okay, and if they paid you $10 plus tips, let's give you an example of one particular hour. Maybe 1 hour you got $5 in tips. So in this hour, tips equaled $5. And so in that particular hour, you got 10 plus $5 equals $15. Say another hour, you got $25 in tips. Okay, in that particular hour, you got 10 plus 25 equals 35. All right, in that particular hour, you got $35 for that hour. All right, hopefully that makes sense. That's a variable pay. You can also simplify the word tips, and you can just make it equal to T. and that way you don't have to write as much. And it looks a lot simpler, this equation right here, not too threatening, 10 plus t, and then t is your tips or the variable element of your pay. There's also an example with a car dealership. Imagine for a minute you work in a car dealership, and maybe it's the same idea, but instead of t, it's going to be commission, so we can even change the t to a c. It's kind of arbitrary. Let's see if I can write that prettier. Okay, your pay is $10 plus commission. Most hours you probably won't sell a car, but the times you do sell a car, it might be a decent chunk of commission. We'll say your commission is 2%, and let's say you sell a car that's $10,000. All right, what's 2% of $10,000? Well, 1% of 10,000 is 100, so twice that is going to be 200. So you make $10 plus 200 for that particular hour that you sold that car, which is $210. Right? So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you understand variable pay, variables in general, and I hope that helps you to understand. If you have any questions, make sure you ask me. Thanks for watching.